Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today is craft day. We are going to be doing an awesome DIY project together that is really simple and super affordable. We are going to be making a hand knitted chunky blanket, and I have one of them wrapped around me right now. I made this last winter and I keep this on my bed all the time. It's beautiful and it's super cozy, and it only cost me $18 for the yarn. And it was really easy to make, and that's what I'm going to show you how to make today. So what you're going to need is at least 3 skeins of yarn. You could get a 4th if you want the blanket to be bigger. This blanket is about 30 inches wide by 50 inches long. It's a really nice throw blanket size. If you want to make something much larger, you can do that, and I will put in the description below how to change the size and how I'll explain how to do it below. If you want it wider or longer, I'll explain it. But besides that, I purchased this yarn from Walmart. They don't sell it online. I wish they did, but they don't. They sell it in the store and they sell multiple colors. It's less than $6 per skein of yarn, but sometimes it's a little bit above $6. The price kind of varies. Last year it was less than $6. I will show you a few of the colors that I purchased. So this is their Mainstays chunky chenille yarn, which is 8 ounces. If you're going to be making the same size as this, you're just going to need 3 skeins of yarn. I still would recommend getting another one just in case. And today I'm going to be making one with this pink yarn. It's very pretty. And what you're going to need besides the yarn, you're going to need measuring tape if you have it. If you don't, that's fine, but it would be ideal if you had it. Also, you're going to need a scissors. And besides that, while we're making this, you're going to be tying knots in the yarn just a few times when you switch over to a new skein of yarn. And I didn't do this with this one, but I didn't reinforce the knots. But I'm going to do that later on today after I finish this other blanket with the pink yarn. But basically, to reinforce the knots, you don't need to do it right away. If you don't have a needle and thread, it's totally okay, because it's easy to, buy that pretty much anywhere and do it at some point. But basically later on, after the blanket's done or whatever, you take your needle and thread and you find where those knots are. There will just be a few of them, and you stitch through the knots several times and tie it off. Tie a knot with your needle and thread. Do it maybe a couple of times through each knot, and that will reinforce it just so that it never comes apart. But like I said, I've had this one which I made last winter and the knots have never come apart, but still I would rather be safe and not have that happen, so I'm going to reinforce the knots later. Besides that, we could just get right into things. I'm going to change the angle with the camera just so you can see everything really clearly. For the first row, what you need to do is make 16 stitches. To do this, you take your first slip knot and you reach some of your fingers through it to grab the working yarn and create a loop, which will be your first stitch. And just keep repeating that until you get to the end. Whatever you do, try your best to not make the stitches too tight. This is like the most common mistake in this very first step. Once you've made your first 16 stitches, then flip the piece vertically so the back side is facing upwards. Angle the loop in the end upward also. Now look for the area with the bump in the middle, as you can see from my video. Put your finger underneath that little bump to reach for the working yarn, pulling it through to create a loop. Lay that loop flat if possible, and then continue working until you reach the very end. You'll be able to see that you've created a braid going along the whole bottom edge of the piece. Now the actual knitting part begins, and this will be done the same way for every single row. There's one important step that you need to remember. Always skip the first stitch in each row. It doesn't matter if the stitch direction is going from left to right or right to left. Always skip the first stitch. By doing this, you will create a braided effect along the edges, and you'll see this as you go along. So to actually make the stitches, hopefully you can see from the video how to do it, but you're basically putting your fingers in between a stitch and pulling the yarn through to create another loop. And the loop should be more or less approximately 2.5 inches. It could be a little bit bigger, and it could even be a little bit tighter if that's how you prefer it. But that's basically it as far as creating the stitches. One tip for when you reach the end of a row is this. Try not to let the last loop become too loose. It's okay if you want the middle section a little looser, but try to keep the very end loop a little bit more tight, and this will provide more structure, and otherwise it tends to look really sloppy along the edges. When it's time to attach yarn, you just tie it into a knot, make sure it's nice and snug, and then cut off the excess and continue knitting as usual. We made it to the very end, and now we need to cast off. Take 2 loops into your hand, then take the working yarn and pull it through those loops to create another loop. Now take that loop into your hand and grab the loop next to it so you have 2 loops once again. Then pull the working yarn through those loops to create another one. Keep doing this until you reach the end. Once you reach the end, pull the final piece of yarn through the final loop to create a small knot. You can double knot this if you prefer. Then you can trim the end of the yarn, leaving 4 to 6 inches in excess of what some may call a tail end. One thing I forgot to show you in the video is that you should try to hide the tail end of that excess piece of yarn. You'll have a tail from the starting point of the piece as well as from the end of the piece. Many people will just weave the tail into the stitches, but I've found that this will end up sticking out or becoming visible. And if you're going to give this to somebody as a gift, I think you should really go the extra step, which is what I'm going to recommend now. So later on, when you reinforce your knots, I recommend sewing the tail end in as well to some nearby stitches. If there's any confusion about this, please let me know and I can either create another short video tutorial or else I'll create a step-by-step photo tutorial and I will put it on my website. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this craft project.